Right now, like half the United States is trapped indoors, just completely melting under this 115-degree heat dome.
Yeah, it is, it's brutal out there.
It really is. But that extreme paralyzing weather is oddly, one of the primary forces that's keeping the global tech economy afloat today.
Which sounds completely backward, I know.
Right. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a system pushed to the absolute breaking point. For you listening, our mission today is to unpack this massive stack of news from the July 10th, 2026 edition of the Daily Tech Reader.
There's just a ton to get through today.
Oh, a massive amount. And the through line connecting all of this is sheer unprecedented volatility. We're looking at escalating military conflict in the Middle East, a bizarrely explosive tech IPO market,
Right.
physical supply chain blockades.
And, well, a fundamental shift in how human beings consume information when they're physically confined to their homes.
Exactly. It's a day that really tests our understanding of cause and effect. But before we get into the mechanics of how a localized event in one hemisphere creates an immediate crisis in another, I need to set a quick ground rule for this deep dive.
Always a good idea with a stack like this.
Yeah, because today's sources include some highly charged global developments involving, the U.S. military, Iran, and former President Trump. So, as always, our mission isn't to take a political stance. We are taking absolutely no sides here, and we're endorsing zero political viewpoints.
Right, we are just looking at the data.
Exactly. We are just here to impartially analyze the facts as they are presented in the source material. We strip away the spin, you get the unfiltered information, and, well, you make up your own mind.
Which is really the only way to genuinely analyze a landscape this complex. You have to separate the political theater from the structural reality.
Let's start with that structural reality right at the epicenter of today's news in the Middle East. Pretty much everything we are going to talk about today stems from this specific geographic bottleneck.
It's the catalyst for the entire day.
It really is. So, Ayatollah Khamenei was buried overnight in Mashhad, capping off a week of these massive processions. But the transition of power is not pausing the military escalation.
Not at all. I mean, we're seeing huge movements.
Right. Iranian state media is reporting that U.S. strikes actually hit the perimeter of the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Now, the U.S. is categorically denying that they are conducting strikes right now, and Israel has totally denied involvement too.
But targeting the perimeter of a nuclear facility, I mean, regardless of who actually pulled the trigger, that is a massive escalation signal.
And Iran's response was, immediate, right?
Oh, instantaneous. They fired 10 ballistic missiles at a U.S. base in northern Jordan. That triggered air raid sirens across the country before the Jordanian air defenses managed to intercept them.
Wow. And we also have this intense intelligence moving in the background. Israel apparently shared intel with the U.S., indicating that Iran might be planning an assassination plot against Donald Trump.
Right, and he actually acknowledged it, noting he is, quote, on every list.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Iran has filed a formal UN Security Council complaint, officially calling the strikes a war crime. So, on paper, we have missiles flying, denied nuclear plant strikes, assassination plots. It looks like the prelude to an all-out war.
It really does. But then you look behind the scenes.
Yeah, the shadow diplomacy. The sources note that U.S. negotiators are currently meeting behind the scenes with Iran to avoid further escalation, and Iraq is actively stepping in to serve as a formal intermediary.
Right.
I am struggling to process that contradiction. I mean, it's like this multi-dimensional game of chess played in the dark. How do modern nations balance the contradiction of launching ballistic missiles at each other and then sitting at the same diplomatic tables in the shadows?
Well, it requires looking at modern warfare through the lens of domestic politics, right? Geopolitical strategists refer to this as managing the escalation ladder.
The escalation ladder.
Yeah. Direct, transparent communication often breaks down in public because both sides need to maintain this posture of absolute strength for their own citizens. Iran's leadership needs to show its domestic audience that, an attack near Bushehr will be met with immediate retaliation.
Right. They have to look tough.
Exactly. And the U.S. needs to project unwavering deterrence. So the ballistic missiles, the UN complaints, that is the public performance of conflict. But behind closed doors, neither government actually wants the devastation of an uncontrolled war.
So they are managing the theater of war while trying to cap the actual violence.
Exactly. And that is where Iraq stepping in as an intermediary is so critical. It allows the U.S. and Iran to avoid direct public negotiation, which, would look weak while secretly establishing the boundaries. They're essentially saying, we are retaliating to save face, but we are aiming for the perimeter, not the core.
Okay, wait, I want to push back on that a bit, or at least trace the real-world impact. Because those missiles in Jordan, they don't just happen in a vacuum, right?
No, absolutely not.
I am looking at the economic data in our stack, and I'm trying to connect the dots. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, just dropped a staggering projection. They are forecasting that global oil demand is going to decline in 2026.
First annual drop since the 2020 pandemic.
Exactly. And they are directly citing this Iran conflict because shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has completely plummeted.
Right. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil choke point. When shipping companies see ballistic missiles flying, insurance premiums for cargo ships just skyrocket, or vessels simply refuse to go.
Okay, but here's my problem. It's this massive butterfly effect, and I want to know exactly how it works, because I am reading here that the 30-year fixed mortgage rate in the U.S. is stuck at a staggering 6.49%.
Yeah, near the year's highest levels.
Right. And existing home sales just fell 2.4% in June, completely stalling the spring buying season. So you have to explain this to me. How does fear in an empty shipping lane 7,000 miles away mathematically translate to 6.49% interest on a suburban home loan?
Well, the mechanism connecting those two things is inflation fear, and it plays out in the bond market.
Okay, walk me through it.
So a shipping lane closes in the Middle East. The market instantly anticipates a future oil shortage, right? That expectation means fuel prices will eventually spike. When everything costs more to transport, goods become more expensive across the board.
Right, basic inflation.
Exactly. And the bond market reacts to the threat of inflation, not just the current reality of it. If institutional investors fear that inflation is going to stick around, they demand higher yields on long-term government bonds to compensate for that risk.
Ah.
And here is the final link. U.S. mortgage rates are heavily benchmarked against the yield on the 10-year Treasury note. So when bond yields spike because of inflation fears driven by a Middle East conflict, mortgage rates automatically spike in tandem.
Wow. So an Iranian missile launch creates shipping fear, which creates inflation fear, which drives up bond yields, and suddenly you can't afford to buy a house in Ohio.
That is the exact causal chain.
Yeah.
That is insane. And this structural gridlock in housing is bleeding into domestic politics, too. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act automatically became law at midnight.
In the most bizarre way possible, I might add.
Yeah, seriously. Former President Trump basically refused to sign it, but wouldn't veto it either because he lacked support for some entirely unrelated voter ID legislation, so he just let it pass automatically.
Which really highlights the dysfunction.
Yeah.
But, the real economic health check actually arrives on Tuesday, July 14th.
Oh, the bank earnings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Major banks, we're talking J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citi, they all report Q2 earnings amid this massive geopolitical uncertainty.
It's going to be a huge stress test.
Absolutely.
But, there is one sector that seems completely detached from this geopolitical gravity, and that is artificial intelligence.
It's like it's operating on a different planet.
It really is. I want to pivot to how this war is squeezing the tech world, because the sources highlight this bizarre paradox. We've got massive material shortages happening right alongside unprecedented financial windfalls.
The helium blockade.
Yes. China just blocked exports of helium, explicitly citing strains from the Iran war. And that is sending a total panic through the AI infrastructure world, right? Because helium is a critical input for semiconductor manufacturing.
Oh, it's non-negotiable. You cannot manufacture advanced microchips without liquid helium. The etching process generates immense heat. And because helium is an inert gas with, unparalleled cooling capacity, you need it to prevent the circuits from melting.
So China shutting off the helium valve is a huge deal.
It literally stops the physical production line.
But looking at the financial data, the AI hardware sector is exploding anyway. SK Hynix just pulled off the largest U.S. IPO by a foreign company ever.
Yeah, they shattered Alibaba's 24/2 record.
Right. They raised $26.5 billion, and the stock popped 14% to $170 a share. And they control, 56% of the high-bandwidth memory market?
Roughly, yeah. Which is exactly the specialized hardware required for AI processing.
And meanwhile, Micron just upped its U.S. investment to an unfathomable $250 billion through 2035 to build the largest semiconductor site in U.S. history up in central New York.
$250 billion. It's staggering.
It is. I mean, think about it like this. It's like watching a high-speed bullet train, right? And someone just stole the engine oil, the helium. But somehow the train is still accelerating to record speeds with Micron and SK Hynix. How long can this disconnect last between the physical supply chain reality and this AI financial euphoria?
Well, the disconnect really comes down to a timeline mismatch. Wall Street isn't valuing SK Hynix based on how much helium they can import this Tuesday.
Right, they're looking ahead.
Exactly. They're pricing these companies on the absolute conviction that high bandwidth memory is the unavoidable bottleneck to achieving artificial general intelligence over the next decade.
So they're just assuming the supply chain stuff will get sorted out.
Basically, yeah. Investors are placing a very expensive bet that these tech giants will secure alternative helium sources or engineer a completely new cooling paradigm. They are pricing in a future where the AI revolution happens regardless of current physical constraints.
Okay, but eventually, all this AI hardware, all these chips, they exist to power the screens we're all looking at, right?
That's the end user application.
Which brings us to how we're actually consuming that technology and this massive shift in the attention economy. Because, like we said at the start, a huge portion of the country is currently trapped indoors by dangerous weather.
Environmental data in this stack is genuinely alarming.
It really is. A massive heat dome covers 2/3 of the contiguous U.S., stretching from the northern plains all the way to the east. Over 90 local records could break.
I saw the Gulf Coast cities like Miami, Tampa, Galveston, Charleston. They won't even drop below 80 degrees at night.
And the heat indices are hitting 105 to 115 degrees early next week. When millions of people are physically trapped inside an air-conditioned room just trying to survive, their habits change.
Radically.
Yeah. Consumers are shifting. We see Netflix shares dropped 3.2%. They are down 22% year to date amid all these engagement concerns. And they are actually considering a pivot to live TV channels.
Right, because solitary binge watching loses its appeal when you're trapped inside. People want a shared reality.
Which explains why live sports are completely thriving right now. The 2026 World Cup is driving unprecedented media revenue for Fox and Telemundo.
It's the ultimate communal event.
Exactly. France just advanced to the Dallas semifinals by beating Morocco 2-0. Mbappe tied the Golden Boot race with his 8th goal. Spain and Belgium are tied 1-1 at halftime in LA right now.
And we've got Norway versus England, Argentina versus Switzerland coming up on Saturday.
The engagement is off the charts. But on the flip side, Meta just got hit with an EU preliminary ruling under the Digital Services Act over, quote, addictive design features on Instagram and Facebook, so they're risking massive fines.
Right, for essentially being too good at keeping people scrolling.
And then you have the Emmy nominations that just came out, proving that streaming platforms, Apple, Netflix, HBO, are entirely dominating the broadcast networks. But wait, I have to challenge this whole media landscape synthesis.
Go for it.
Okay, is Netflix's sudden interest in live TV actually a strategic innovation? Or is it just a panic move? Because it seems like live events like Mbappe scoring a goal are the only things powerful enough to capture our attention when we are melting in 115-degree heat.
I think it's an adaptation to scarcity, honestly.
Right.
Attention is the rarest commodity in the modern economy. Netflix trained us to watch whatever we want, whenever we want.
Right, on demand.
But in a highly volatile world, the fear of missing out on a live, shared cultural moment is actually stronger than the desire for convenience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which really brings everything we've talked about today full circle.
It really does. If you step back and synthesize this single Friday's news cycle, you see an incredibly fragile, interconnected global system. I mean, a geopolitical burial in Mashhad leads to a ballistic missile over Jordan. That creates shipping fear in the Strait of Hormuz, driving up bond yields and keeping a family from buying a home at 6.49%.
While simultaneously giving China the geopolitical cover to ban helium, which threatens the physical manufacturing base of an AI sector that Wall Street is throwing $250 billion at.
Exactly. And all of that technology is ultimately consumed by a public, physically trapped by a record-breaking heat dome, shifting their attention away from streaming and toward live shared moments.
It is wild how connected it all is. Well, as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you listening with one final thought to mull over.
It's a big one.
Yeah, we talked about the paradox of Meta being punished in the EU for having highly addictive design features, while Netflix is punished by Wall Street for losing our engagement. So the next time you look at your own smartphone, let's think about this. In a world dealing with extreme heat domes, fractured supply chains, and escalating global conflict, is our technology serving as a window to actually understand these crises? Or is it just a highly engineered $250 billion distraction to help us comfortably ignore them?
Something to think about while we're all stuck inside.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay cool out there, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.